Every race is going to be slightly different, and so I'll break it down into a couple of different things. If it was a drive, so if you can wake up in the morning or even the day before or a couple of days before and you're driving to your location, my first advice would be try and pack as much as you can. So get a little esky, or for those who aren't Australian, a cooler bag, and fill it with ice blocks, and then take as much food as you possibly can. And that might just be as simple as taking chicken rice vegetable meal that you can eat cold in the car, chicken salad wrap, a burrito or something like that you can easily eat whilst you're driving. Or one of my favourite sort of go-to options, particularly for a breakfast, would be an overnight oats. So rolled oats, nuts and seeds, cover it in milk and some yogurt, put some berries and fruit over the top. Something that won't spill on your lap whilst you're driving, but you can eat as a breakfast meal sort of on the go. And then try and take as many snacks as you can with you. If you're stopping off at service stations, my go-tos are beef jerky, because it's shelf stable as well. You don't need a refrigerator. Generally, some of the milk products, so I try and avoid things that have supplements added to it, particularly for some of the elite level athletes that need to be mindful of substances that are potentially in like a protein supplemented drink. But something, chocolate milk might be okay, or a yogurt pouch, cheese and crackers. There's often like nut mixes and trail mixes at service stations, and then sort of standard muesli bars would be my go-to snacks. If you're traveling and needing to fly, again, I would try and make sure you've got a main meal before getting on the flight, not relying too heavily on airport food. One, generally because it's poor quality and you're going to pay triple the price what you would normally pay. And then taking as many snacks with you as you can. And then it's doing a little bit of research before you get there, finding restaurants, finding your supermarkets, finding things that you're familiar with, because you're not going to be able to carry much off the plane, or take things that need refrigeration.
Where does Macca's fit in this? They're everywhere, going up and down the highways. I know I've been a culprit of doing this even before a race.
Yeah. And realistically, that will fall into a lot of people's sort of day-to-day or race nutrition when they're on the road. And that's okay. It's just being mindful of what you're having and trying to keep it to something similar. So my best tip for takeaways when you're on the road is avoid all the sides, desserts, chips, soft drinks, and just go for the mains. So trying to get, 2 wraps, 2 burgers, 2 bacon egg McMuffins is a great example, or however many you need, but having more of the mains and skipping the sides. What you'll find is you'll get more protein. Ideally, there'll be a little bit of salad, even if it's just lettuce and tomato. But we are skipping sort of deep fried hot chips that are going to be deep fried in really poor quality oils. And we're skipping the soft drinks, which is going to be full of sugar. So we get a little bit more protein, a little bit more fiber in there, but more importantly, it's going to fill you up for a lot longer. So you're not having to then snack on a whole bunch of other things as well. In Australia, Nando's is a great option as well. They've got some really good quality sort of chicken salad wraps, a Porto, Macca's, KFC, those places. Red Rooster, you can still get, burgers and wraps that are obviously not as good as home cooked, but a good start if you're on the road and stuck for food.
So you're planning ahead, packing your own food's always going to be the best situation.
Yeah. Little bit of extra time, but and also keeping in mind that prior to racing, we're trying to make you feel as energized as possible, and those sort of foods aren't going to do the job as well as having your own home cooked food. Sometimes it could just be those microwavable brown rice packets or rice and quinoa. They don't need to be refrigerated. Tin of tuna doesn't also need to be refrigerated. It's not going to taste all that great, but at least we're ticking off a couple of nutrition boxes there.
Does hydration play a key role in this as well?
Yeah, definitely. Because often what I find is if you've got a long drive or even a long flight, people will purposely avoid drinking so that they have to stop for loo stops. So obviously into racing as well, we want to make sure that you are very well hydrated. So you don't need to be overhydrated to the point of really clear urine, but you want to make sure that when you've got, tire on the line, that we're making sure that you're well and truly hydrated, because there's going to be potentially a small amount of dehydration over a long race. So you don't want to be starting in a dehydrated state, because that's only going to affect your performance negatively. So you might need to be adding electrolytes to your fluid whilst you're traveling, but particularly if you're in an airport and on a plane for a long time, it's very easy to get dehydrated quite quickly. So being mindful that you're keeping on top of hydration, trying to drink fluid with your meals and snacks, and then potentially adding an electrolyte tablet or powder to your drinks to make sure that you're absorbing as much of that fluid as possible.
Are Cokes and stuff okay before a race for like a carb loading? Or
Can be. They're generally not my go-to carb load option, but in saying that, with cyclists in particular, we'll often sort of have that as a mid or post race, and that's typically to try and get as much sort of glycogen back into the muscles as possible, particularly if it's a multi-stage event. Can also be used as a bit of a caffeine hit. If people really, really like to use it as part of their pre-race loading, then that's okay. I'd incorporate that if they really wanted to, but it's not typically my first option, just because we can often find far better sort of nutritious foods to help carb load. I'm a big believer in carbo loading without garbo loading, as I say, so that we're using foods that are not going to provide that huge sugar spike, particularly days before the race. A little bit different if it's in the final sort of 30 to 60 minutes before a race, where we are looking for a little bit of a hit. But as in the days leading up to it, I'm trying to avoid those blood sugar spikes as much as possible and use complex carbohydrates to load as opposed to high sugar foods.
are there the complex carbohydrate drink mixes?
Very few that I would use. Often, if we're really struggling to get carbohydrates in, I'll use the sports drink that the athlete typically uses in training. And the benefit of that is it'll often have some electrolyte with it as well, and it's a product they're used to. If they're a big fan of soft drink, then we might look at it, but I would typically try and use food where we can, and then the sports drink that they would typically use before using Coke. It's usually my last resort.